All right, hello and welcome to Building Access for All Learners, AI Tools and Strategies for Accommodating, Adapting, and Modifying Assignments, presented by Michelle Gilly, Megan Brady, and Barbara Bodwin from Poway Unified School District. I'm Megan Gross, SIP Program Support Specialist, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this breakout session. I'm a middle-aged white woman with brown hair, blue eyes, wearing a blue t-shirt and sitting in front of a Zoom teal background. A few logistics. This session will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda page after the conference for 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The interpretation icon in the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We are still navigating that back channel just a little bit. We're having some technical difficulties, so if you need Spanish translation, please don't hesitate to let us know in the chat. We will ensure that ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and presenter. Please ensure your volume is muted to avoid background distractions while presenters speak. We encourage you to engage with others in the chat, and when possible, keep your camera on so we can see your faces. And with that, team, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Megan. We appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have you here today and to be able to spend some time with you. On our slide deck, we do have a bit.ly for you to be able to access all of the materials, as well as a QR code. So whatever preference you have is available that way. As we go into introductions, so I'm Michelle Gilly. I'm the Special Education Director for Poway Unified School District. I'm a middle-aged white woman with long blonde hair and blue eyes and very pale skin with a teal Zoom background. Okay, Megan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Brady, and I'm an inclusion specialist in Poway Unified. I am a middle-aged white woman, even though I look much younger. I have long brown hair, green eyes, and I am in front of a teal background provided by SIP, and then I'm wearing my light blue SIP t-shirt.
And I'm Barbara Bodwin. I'm one of Poway's district inclusion specialists. I support elementary, middle, and support our high school team. I am also a middle-aged white woman. I have medium length brown hair and I wear glasses to cover my beautiful brown eyes. And I'm also sitting in front of the SIP teal background.
Amazing. So today, what we want to make sure that we kind of touch base with you on, thank you so much, Thomas, for putting the bit.ly in the chat. We want to kind of do a little bit of an introduction about what we have available in Poway, because we know that that's not always the same from district to district. So we have found that it's very helpful when we start with that so that we are utilizing the same semantic language. And that way you are able to make connections between what we might call something a certain name with what your district calls it. And so that we found is helpful. We're going to go through some non-tech-based strategies for accommodating, adapting, and modifying assignments. Again, so that there's a little bit of a clarity around what we would call each item and tier of support. Then we're going to talk about some AI tools. We have a lot of different examples and resources. And what we found to be the most helpful is to provide examples of prompts that you could then utilize and adapt for your needs to get you some of the types of supports that we have in place and some of the assignments that we're going to show you. So as we dive in, the first thing that we have is what our post-secondary pathways look like in Poway Unified. So the two on the right, the high school diploma, the purple column, and the A to G high school diploma pathway, which is kind of that yellow column, tend to be pretty consistent from district to district. All the way to the left, the green column, which is that certificate of completion pathway, is also very common in most districts. But we have an additional tier that we rolled out a few years ago that we're very proud of called our alternative pathway to a high school diploma. Now, this is a resource that we share with parents, we share with our staff. This is very visible across our PUSD community. We utilize it in transition meetings and presentations to families as they're matriculating as well to help kind of understand the different pathways for students. So our alternative pathway to a high school diploma is where a lot of the work that Megan and Barb, their work lives, is really to support our students who are accessing a certificate of completion pathway or an alternative alternative pathway to a high school diploma. Now, some of their work and some of their strategies and their expertise are also utilized for trainings and support for some of our students in more like RSP-based settings to help support accommodating work for students that maybe are on that more traditional high school diploma-bound pathway in that purple column. And so as we dive into that, this is another page that we share with families, we share with staff, again, just so that we all have the same language as we go into IEP team conversations or trainings. So for us, we define accommodations as something that allows students to access the curriculum to make progress towards their goals, right? It might be IEP goals, it might be goals of the curriculum, but what it does is it changes how the student achieves mastery. So they're still mastering the exact same content standards as the other students in the class, but we might be changing how we're doing that, right? We might be building in extended time. We might be giving some environmental supports. We might be doing graphic organizers, sentence starters, and we're going to show you some of those examples. But it's going to be something that is going to change how that student shows that they achieve that mastery. I'm going to jump to the right column, which is the modifications, because I feel like this is another one that is pretty consistent from district to district. So modifications is where we're talking about changing what a student acts or what a student masters. So now we have changed, you know, the content that they're covering. Maybe they aren't taking the same classes as other students are taking. Maybe they're focusing more on those vocational or daily living or functional skills. But we've changed what we're asking them to master. We are no longer looking at the content standards. We might be doing things related to that, but we're no longer kind of focusing on that for that student's programming. Now, the middle column, again, is kind of the unique to Poway one that we have. And this is specifically for our students who are accessing the alternative pathway to a high school diploma. And those are adaptations. So when we say adaptations, we are talking about work that we provide a student that, again, is relating to the content standards. So they might be in a biology class or a history class. And we are creating an activity or an assignment that is at their level that relates back to what the rest of the class is working on so that we can emphasize and encourage that participation, that social communication with their peers, and the engagement in the class activity as a whole, instead of seeing what happens sometimes, which is that class within a class, right? So this is our way to try and ensure that those students are actively engaged and part of that whole class culture and lesson. So as we dive into accommodations, the piece that I always want to make sure we say is accommodations sometimes can change to modifications depending on the standard that we're assessing. So there are times, especially between elementary and secondary, where we have to be very conscientious of what we're actually looking at the standard to be and what we're assessing. So sometimes teachers have, you know, this is the standard, this is what we have to do. But when you actually look at the standard as it's written, it might not say that, right? There's a lot of urban myths about what the quote expectations are for students or what they should be doing at certain grade levels or how they can show mastery on certain things. And when you read the standards, some of them are very simplistic and very clear, right? But a lot of them give room for flexibility and give room for autonomy. And so what that does is it allows us to build in some of those accommodations and some of those alternative activities to kind of support students in engaging in the lessons, meeting their needs and also showing mastery of the standards. So we always want to make sure that we kind of put that caveat in here. So the example we always give is if you are testing a student on, you know, if you're looking at a traditionally diploma-bound student and your standard is about being able to add two numbers together, giving them a calculator for that is probably not going to be an appropriate accommodation, right? But in high school, if you're testing their ability to follow multi-step equations, you're not assessing whether they can add the numbers together, right? You're assessing whether they can follow the procedural steps. And so utilizing a calculator in that moment is an accommodation and is appropriate and doesn't change the standard that you're asking them to master. So that's kind of where we have those conversations with staff. The other thing I want to acknowledge is while we use the word accommodations because we're kind of in that special education world, a lot of the same tools and supports in other spaces are often identified through high quality instruction strategies. Many of them are considered just good teaching strategies or part of some of the examples and strategies often utilized under UDL and Universal Design for Learning. So again, semantically, right, we're talking about a lot of the same things, but you may refer to it as something different in your spaces. So as we dive in, some of these are going to be things that are very common and things that you and your teachers utilize regularly. The purpose of putting them here is sometimes when you see it presented in a different way, it sparks something else as a reminder. So I always use the graphing calculators as an example, and this would apply to any calculator use, graphing calculators. I say the same thing for any program-specific apps that you're using in your classes, whether that's because it's a VAPA type class where they need to utilize certain types of computer-based programs, or if you like to use things like Kahoot, right? But including those visuals of what it should look like is really important because a lot of times we see that our staff are modeling what to do, right? We have in this example, a graphing calculator under the document camera, and the teacher is clicking the buttons and showing them where to go. And they've done that for one or two problems. And now the students are working, in groups or on their own, and they have nothing to reference. So really finding ways to build those more referenceable items is going to be really supportive, and a long-term support, right? Those things can go in students' notebooks and they can always access them, and they aren't dependent on a peer or a teacher embedding, they're reteaching it during the lesson, right? They're able to foster some independence with that. The one on the right is another kind of example of a visual, and it was about annotation. And so being very clear about which types of markings to utilize for annotations. Sometimes you see this written on the board, sometimes the teacher verbally talks about it, or it's on a PowerPoint slide. But as soon as the time comes to actually look at the article or the text, that visual reference is gone. And so when teachers are able to embed it in the text so that, again, it's there for the student to kind of reference throughout the activity, that can be a much more beneficial use of that time to build that tool for the students. The next one is use of a graphic organizer. So this one we always find is interesting because I feel like graphic organizers tend to be kind of this throwaway, right? Everybody's like, everybody does that. But when you do it with purpose, it can be super helpful. So this one was interesting because they used not only an acronym, right? They wrote out the words of what it meant. They broke them apart. They chunked the headings on the right for some other topics that they were going to cover. And then at the bottom, they also included not only the fill in the blanks, right, with the references of what needs to go in there, but also an example. So sometimes we think of a graphic organizer as just a way for people to represent information and to organize it on a piece of paper, right? That's in the name. But sometimes it helps to kind of categorize what you're talking about as well. So in this assignment, right, they have these larger black bars that separate the table on the left from the boxes on the right, from the written or the written portion down below. And so there is some delineation between those. And so again, if you're looking at a student who maybe needs to get their assignment in smaller pieces to support anxiety or work completion, this is an example of kind of how you could do that in a visual way. Now, when it comes to more complicated tasks, not tasks, sorry, content, the utilization of sentence frames and guided notes or fill in the blank is really helpful. And I know sometimes the perception is that this should only be utilized when we're doing, lecture style things or students are jigsawing information together. But it can be a really good starting point for students that you're working with to build towards the end of the year of not needing it, right? So the example at the top right is more of a middle school example where we're talking about more of a PowerPoint presentation that you're taking notes on. But the one below that is a high school one where we're teaching the students how to basically go through and identify pieces of evidence. That was the focus for this activity. So they got sentence frames, they got kind of how to set up the sentences, and then they were given fill in the blanks for where those pieces of evidence and explanation needed to happen. And again, that's something that over the course of the year you would fade back on so that they can do it independently. And so it's just an example when we talk about being very clear about what the actual standard is that you're assessing with the assignment. And so it allows kind of some more of that flexibility that maybe we didn't think we could put in right beforehand. The other piece is the reduction of questions or the task, right? And so looking at this was the traditional assignment. So there were 5 questions. Some of them are very, some of the sentences are much simpler than others. And the idea was that they were underlining the allusion and explaining what it was referring to. This is 5 of the very same task, right? The sentences that they're doing is where the complexity increases. So if you have a student who's struggling with maybe work completion or staying on task or persevering through maybe this is a non-preferred activity, you can reduce those, right? You don't need the student to do it 5 times to say that they've mastered it. You can ask them to, oopsies, you can ask them to do maybe the first 2, or maybe it's the last one. That was always my favorite strategy as a teacher whenever I needed to reduce the number of questions. I always gave them, I would say, the harder one because then it meant that they showed the mastery of all the skills, right? But they only had to do 1 problem instead of 10 or whatever it was. And then this one is a big one. And if you can't tell some of the examples, I was a high school math teacher, so in my prior job. And so this was something that I spent a lot of time figuring out how to make integrated math accessible. And so the question that's listed there, practice writing f of x notations using the data table provided. That was all that was in the activity, right? The data table was on a top part of the page that they had to then reference back. It was just numbers. They had to figure out how to plug them in and then be able to actually write the notation for the formula that was on the previous page, right? So lots of different places to reference. And so something as simple as putting those numbers as bullet points, right, and different questions, so question A, B, C, D, E, and F, helps them remember that they needed to do each one of those. So it's a visual reminder. I didn't give them any answers to anything. I was not assessing their ability to read a table at that time. Right? My whole thing was practicing writing the actual notation. And so being able to add that support was something that made that way more accessible. And we often find that with math problems that there's a lot of shortened questions that ask you to reference information elsewhere. And so being able to compile that into one spot for the student to be able to really look at the problem as a whole can remove a lot of barriers for them. All right, modifications.
Okay. So switching to the complete other end of the spectrum. So my role as an inclusion specialist is to provide modified curriculum for our most impacted students while accessing general education. And the biggest thing that we are incredibly mindful of is that the work that we are providing is and looks very similar to what the rest of the class is doing. We never want the things that we're providing to look like a classroom within a classroom. So we try and take whatever the assignment is that the general ed students are working on, and we add to it, cut things out, add visuals, change visuals, and just try the best that we can to make it a more accessible version for our students who, may not have otherwise been within a general education setting. So an example for this, a science lesson where they're doing guided notes, we might do things like provide the answers for whatever the key questions are, or identify the task that within the assignment that talks about whatever the skill that we're working on or the standard we're working on. So you can see we've highlighted where it says like what happens to the PE of the skater when you change her mass. So talking about potential and kinetic energy, the student just simply needs to circle, is it increasing or decreasing? We do this a lot with science, particularly when we do guided notes. We will either write the answer next to the blank, so the student is just near point copying. Sometimes we put it to where they just need to highlight the answer. Sometimes we have a completely filled in version where they're just highlighting, and sometimes we have a blank with a filled in version side by side where students can just input the answer.
Barb, I'm just gonna jump in real quick and just add that in POWA Unified, we include a lot of our students who would typically in other classes might be in a special day class are included in a general education setting. So that's just to kind of add that little piece of uh, context around what Barb is talking about.
Thank you. So again, with modifications, we're changing what the task is. So we are no longer working on the grade level standard. And this is where it becomes really, really important to be very crystal clear whether you are working on an accommodation or a modification. Those 2 words we have learned through many, many, many meetings and presentations. That those 2 words get interchanged a lot, but they mean 2 very, very different things. One allows you to access the course and grade level standards to earn credit. One does not. So we are very mindful when we are doing presentations or presenting material that we are very clear whether it is an example of an accommodation or an example of a modification. So an example for the same assignment could be something as simple as which direction is the person moving? Are they moving up? Are they moving down? Are they moving right? Are they moving left? It could be point to the picture where the skater is on the right, point to the picture where the skater is on the left, point to the color green, point to the word friction. There's lots of different ways that you can use the exact same assignment and make it accessible for a student and based on their individual needs. This is an example of a novel. So one of the things that we get lots and lots of requests for are novels, and our team supports everybody TK through our transition program. So we get a pretty broad range of requests for things. Novels come in pretty frequently. So this was a novel that I actually did. So what we tend to do is take the novel, and I would love to say I have all the time in the world to read every novel and then create a whole version of it. I do not. So what we utilize is AI, which we'll talk a little more as we go through the rest of the presentation. But we might go through, this is a super, super simple version where we might be working with a student. A lot of the students we support have Down syndrome. So this might be a student who requires just real short, sweet, to the point summaries of things. So some of our novels look similar like this, where it's one sentence or two sentences to discuss the contents of an entire chapter. We have other examples of novels where we will take the summaries from, like Super Summary is a really great website we use. And I will take that and reduce the reading level. And then I will create very simple literal comprehension questions to go along with it. So what we ask our teachers to do is to have our student participate in the class as much as they can, listening to the audiobook, going through the worksheets like everybody else. And then we use these adapted or modified versions. We use these when they're doing their independent work time to really just kind of hone in on the couple of points that we want them to catch from each chapter. This is an example for math. We have found math can be one of the most challenging courses to modify. Similar to Michelle, I was a middle school math teacher for many years in my past life. And having students with such a drastic difference between what the class is working on and where the individual student ability is, there's not always a way to kind of make the assignments work that the rest of the class is doing. So this was an example of students were working on triangle congruencies. So looking at angle comparisons, looking at side length comparisons. So I had one of my students do this worksheet where they were just identifying a triangle, still working on a similar concept, but in a way that was accessible for them. So this is now where we get into adaptations. So remember, in our district, adaptations refer to our students in high school who are accessing our alternative pathway to a diploma. So these are what the state came out with as standard extenders. So all the way on the left-hand side, it'll tell you the grade level clusters. So it will explain what the very sometimes complicated standard is trying to measure. The next column will talk about what exact common core element is within those standards. And where we spend our time when we're creating work for students is right over there on the right-hand side for the instructional achievement level descriptor. We like to call them tiers. So we look at our individual student needs and we kind of figure out like what level of access point should we start with. For the students that I support as an inclusion specialist, most of our students are down at that very bottom level, level 1AA. So the nice part about these extenders is they kind of give a jumping off point for where we can start and then kind of scaffold either down or up from there. So one of the examples that I always share is there's a ninth grade standard that talks about analyzing and comparing quotes from a text. And for our students, that is an incredibly high level, complicated task. So for them, it might be identifying whether a quote is from a text based on what character said it. So they might simply be circling yes or no that it was something that came from that text. And that is a way for us to show that they have access to standard at a level that makes sense and is most appropriate for them. So these are examples from high school geoscience. The one on the left is a chapter summary. So we tend to base our work off of a second grade reading level. So we will take the textbook, we throw it into things like this one came from Diffit. We ask it to simplify the reading level for our students. We ask it to do a summary so that way they have a really simple reference point. And then we include a series of activities. So it might be something like on the right side where they're just matching the image to the vocab word. It could be that we've added in very simple literal multiple choice questions. It might be doing a mind map, lots of different ways to make that really complicated subject accessible. This is an example from a high school econ class, not the simplest of classes to adapt work for. So talking about supply and demand, you can see that we gave very clear visuals. On the bottom left, there is a series of 4 shelves that have lots of toys on them. And when we're looking on the right, the shelf is empty, talking about if there's many toys in the store, there's a big supply. And if there's a few toys in the store, then maybe there's a smaller supply. You could also then talk about if there's a lot of those sitting on the shelf, that maybe the demand for those isn't as high as whatever was on that empty series of shelves. Very simple explanations for things like the law of supply, how price drives up what we create for supply and how it affects it. If nobody's buying it, we don't make as many. So just very clear, simple explanations for what would otherwise be a pretty overwhelming task. This is another example. This one has a little bit more language. So this might be for one of our students who might be working at that like level 2 access on the extenders. You can see the formatting is a little bit different. We have more complete sentences instead of the bulleted kind of list. Just a little bit of a more in-depth version than what the first one was. Okay, so same thing on this one. So looking at the rules of the game by Amy Tan, there's a supported text on the left where we've reduced, even just looking at the visual, we've reduced the amount of content on the page. We've given those spacings. On the right is the theme tracker. So looking at the original theme tracker, it's pretty vague as far as access for our students. There's not a lot of jumping in points. The adapted version, has things added in. So you can see we've created sentence starters for their analysis. We have put in things on the left side for them to pick out which theme or topic they want to choose. Just making things more accessible without having to create a completely separate assignment, which is sometimes what our gen ed counterparts want. Nice, easy ways for you to take these as examples to show your peers that things are really very easily made accessible for students just by simply adding in sentence starters and maybe like a word bank. This is an example of adapting something on the spot. So one of the biggest things that we do within my role is we train our instructional assistants. So all of our students attend class with a one-to-one instructional assistant, and we like to empower them to utilize the tools to adapt assignments on the spot. We don't have the manpower and the time to adapt every single assignment prior to class. So it's really important that our instructional assistants who are supporting our students know really simple, easy ways to make an assignment accessible. So this was a plate tectonics test for, I believe it was 7th grade. And all we simply did was added in things like, here's a word bank for the first question. Here's things that you can just highlight and answer. Look for the vocab word. We're not asking them to dive deep into much, except just highlight the word, giving them that visual relationship between a word that they already know and then finding it within the test itself. And again, you can utilize things like ChatGPT, which we train our instructional assistants on how to access those for those kind of on the spot, last minute accommodations and modifications and adaptations. Here's another one looking at a social studies text. So the left side is the original copy of the textbook. So we might highlight the parts of the text where students can find answers to questions. And then if you've ever looked at a social studies book, the questions that go along at the end of those lessons tend to be pretty in depth. There's usually a lot of analysis. Some of them have, inferencing what you think happened during that time. So we like to give them very clear, concrete, literal questions to answer, and then give them those highlighted clues as to where to find the answer. Here's another one. So we've, over the years, kind of changed the way that we've done our social studies. I have personally done 3 different sets of textbooks to try and figure out a version that works best. And we've kind of learned that every student accesses things differently. So now we just have a plethora of options. So for this one, there's a word bank provided. So it might be that students are going through, the rest of the class might be going through their, a lot of our students do Avid strategies, so they might be doing formal Cornell notes. That might not be the most accessible thing for our students. So a lot of times we'll have them copy down simple words or phrases. And then when they're doing their independent work, they will access something like this. So we've taken the textbook, have the textbook on their screen, and then this is a printout version that they're looking at, and they're filling in based on the shortened sections that we have from the textbook. And we've done this with every social studies text. We've done it with all the science textbooks, child development, everything you can name from elementary all the way through high school. And then you can see the questions are pretty simple, like what's one fact you learned? We try not to just do yes and no. We try to do things where they have to reference what's above to answer the question. Try to make it a little bit challenging if we can. And then I will turn it over to Megan for AI tools.
So these are just some of the different AI tools that we use, and also um, some of the examples you've already seen were created using AI. So we use ChatGPT. I've used it to help write prompts. So I've been into ChatGPT and said, I need, here's what I'm doing, here's the audience, here's what I'm running, here's the problems I'm running into with other AI. Tell me how to tell it, I asked AI to tell me how to tell it so I could get what I wanted. There's also Gemini. They have gems, which are really cool, and you can save them. And so if you're doing the same kind of task over and over again, you can create a gem. And there's also gems available on the internet that someone else has already gone through the trouble of creating. Diffit is really fantastic for leveling passages, reading, and that was used to create that geoscience example. Also, another cool thing with Diffit is you can now align it. If you have the fancy version, you can now align it to the state standards, which is an extra component. And they just updated their system a little bit to where you can ask for specific things. So you could ask it, want it guided practice, independent practice. You want it to take 45 minutes. You want it to take a full hour. So there's a lot more options in that now. Magic School is really fantastic. There are tons and tons and tons of tools in Magic School, and I believe currently it's free for schools. it gives you ideas for accommodations, behavior interventions. You can go in and say, here's the behaviors I'm seeing, and it will help you write a behavior intervention plan. It also, if you get an angry email from a parent that you need to respond to professionally, you can put your response into Magic School and it will give you a very professional email response back. There's also Suno, which creates lyrics. So you can create lyrics in a different AI like ChatGPT or something, and then Suno will create songs. Some of our students love singing, they love songs, and that will actually help them learn. And then Claude is really great for creating example assignments. So if you are, working with other teachers and you want to give someone an idea of what you're creating or talking about, you just pop it right there into Claude and it will give you some stuff. So I mentioned this just a moment ago. So I asked ChatGPT, I was working on, like Barb said, sometimes those social studies books are a little difficult to really adapt appropriately so that they fit everyone. And I was noticing that with some of the AI, it wasn't including all the information or it was giving me weird information. So I went to ChatGPT and just said, I'm an inclusion specialist. Here's what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm getting out of AI. And um, it wrote a really great prompt for me that I still use. And then just a note is you want to make sure that you're reviewing materials before you just hand them straight to students. Sometimes AI gets it wrong or doesn't understand certain stories or novels. The book Clap When You Land is one of those such examples. It's a really beautiful book written in poetry, and it goes back and forth between the perspectives of two young women, and AI didn't understand the story at all. So sometimes you have to, kind of, make sure you're paying attention to what AI is giving you. So this is the example of that ChatGPT prompt that I asked. And if you go into our slide deck, you should be able to copy and paste. So you're welcome to steal it. So you see here, I gave me the role and context, the task. I was able to say what standard I want it to relate to, and then how I want it to give me output. And then you just, paste the text right there. So this was a cool thing I found in Gemini. We had a student in economics who, need like stories, likes pictures, doesn't really read. And so I went in. Michelle, can you go back just so I can see what my prompt was? So I just asked it to create a storybook for a high school student with a cognitive disability, reading at first grade, and explain the difference between monetary and non-monetary incentives, as well as the role of private property as an incentive um, in conserving and improving scarce resources. Now, I mean, I don't know about all of you. I'm not an econ teacher, so even just using the standard was a lot, but then it gave us this cool storybook. And as you see, I think the first one I did, it gave me with a girl, and it was made for a young male student. So I went back and asked it to change to a male student. And it's just great. It goes through in a story format that, either the student could read or an adult could read to the student, to kind of take the student through a real life example to illustrate, those very difficult concepts. So these are DFID examples. So the original article is linked here. As you can see, it is a scholarly, peer-reviewed journal article from, I don't even know what. But this is someone's massive research time and project. And then I took a PDF and uploaded it to Diffit. This particular student I made it for reads about a fourth, fifth grade level. And I was able to tell it it's, the grade level, what I wanted it to focus on, because we wanted it to focus on, the comparison. I also had the option in Diffit to say, I want there to be a text to life connection. So I do believe it might be this one or a different one I made, where it added in an activity for the student to look for themselves. And Michelle, if you just want to scroll down a little bit, you can see there's pictures. That massive article was taken down to um, a small bit. There's vocabulary, and then again, it has sentence starters, so for the connection for the student to make. So this is I went into magic school. So for some of our students in those integrated high school math classes, I know Michelle and Barb both mentioned that they are math teachers. I am not. So sometimes I even look at that stuff and I'm like, oh. But I went into magic school and used the math spiral tool. I chose pre-KK as the grade level. I asked for 10 problems about factoring. And it created the worksheets. I did have to do a little extra because it gave me it just gave me weird images. So I just copied and pasted it into a Google Doc, and then added my own little pictures. So, you see here the student can say, they can just say which group of 4 apples is split into 2 groups of 2. So that way they can still be working on the standard that relates to factoring, but it's accessible. This is a Suno example. So we use ChatGPT to create the prompt, put in the grade level, the topic and concept, what were the most important things inside the larger concept that the student needed. And then it came up with the lyric, the ChatGPT came up with the lyrics, and then Suno was able to make the song. Now, Michelle, if you have the song, is that
I do. It's linked in here. So if you guys want to listen to it, I think the thing with this too, and this is a free version of Suno. So if you do short songs, you'll get the whole thing. I did a long one just to see how far it would go. But there are paid versions of this too. So everything we've shown you is something you can access for free, because we know that not every district has access to things. So if you do a short songs, it will be enough for you to be able to access kind of on that free end.
And then Claude is so this is the prompt for Claude asking it to create a worksheet of an assignment for a student with an intellectual disability. I've noticed that when we're using AI, it's important to note that you're asking for it to create something for a student who is in high school or is in middle school with a developmental disability or cognitive disability, because that keeps AI from making it do like babyish, right? So we can still be respectful of our students and that they are, not always in elementary school. And then, so this was the prompt to just kind of add things in. And then, Michelle, if you want to pop up the example. So this is the example of the assignment that came from Claude. And as you can see, it is like 14 pages. So it will give you enough of whatever you need. Because I do know sometimes as we're adapting and modifying, it seems like, oh, it's going to take them 10 minutes, whereas the whole class is working on something for a week. So that's when it looks like one nice thing about Claude is that you get a lot out of it.
And I think the other thing that's nice with Claude is that you can have it either you can, similarly to what Megan said for some of the other ones, you can upload an existing assignment that you already have that you want it to adapt or modify. Or in this case, we asked it to just create assignments based on the content area and what we were looking at, and asked for different levels. So it gave us an elementary example, a middle school example, and a high school example. And so again, just to kind of give you an idea of how it sets up. And then for any of the AI tools, and I said this in some of the other previous slides too, right? The way they set them up sometimes can lead you to utilizing additional strategies beyond that aren't tech-based, right? So if this is a student who maybe needs task cards, right? The way this is set up is great. I can print this, I can cut them into little task cards, and each question can be a different activity that the student does. So a lot of times being able to blend the two types of supports can be your most beneficial, because again, you save the time on the creation of the materials, and then you can still kind of do some of those environmental supports beyond that as well. So that's everything we have prepared for today. There were a few things in the chat that we will add to the end of the presentation, so you guys have access to those too. But we wanted to make sure we built in some time and left some time for any Q&A that you guys may have, or anything else that might be helpful that we could embed into our presentation as resources for you guys. And I think we got through most of the questions. If there were any that I missed, please, please, please let us know.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Megan, and Barb. I know I had my notes. I was taking notes on different tools that you all are using that were new to me. And thank you to everybody who attended and contributed in the chat. Like, it makes it such a much more engaging session for all of us. You can access the slides for this presentation in the session description on the vFairs agenda page. And if you have any conference questions, please visit the information booth. You just might find the answers you're looking for there. We hope you'll join us for our lunchtime special feature, which is a live podcast with Alex Partridge. He's going to be talking all about ADHD, and he is just a really cool, dynamic speaker, and we're happy to have him today. We also encourage you to connect with other attendees in the social lounge. Stop to take a selfie in the photo booth. And please share on your socials and tag at SIP Impact with the hashtag SIPCon 2026. As a reminder, if you're a top attendee on our leaderboard at the end of the day tomorrow, you'll get a chance to pick a prize between either an inclusive book bundle or free conference registration for one person to either the MTSS conference in Anaheim in July or the Cal XC conference in October in Burlingame. So we hope to see you throughout our next 2 days. And thank you again to the Poway team for sharing their resources and knowledge and expertise with us.